Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Wallace with the Texas Education Agency. I am so excited that you're here today. I just want to thank you for taking the time to come. I know that things just really hit the ground running once you come back from winter break. I am here today with Tamala Olsby. She will be assisting me with anything that folks need help with. So if you have a question or a comment or something you'd like to share, feel free to use the chat box that's located in the control panel on the right side of your screen. And Tamala will either answer your question or pass that along to me after the webinar is open. I also want to point you to the handout section of the control panel. Again, that's on the right-hand side of your screen. And there is one handout that you will definitely need today. It is the DAP position statement. That's from NAEYC, and we will be reading a section of that document today. So if you want to take the time to go ahead and open that up so that when we get there, you'll be ready to go, that would be fantastic. You will also find the slide deck there if you would like to follow along with the presentation today. As a reminder, the webinar is being recorded so that we can make it available to anyone who is not with us today. I'll give you just 10 more seconds to open up that DAP position statement, again located in the handout section of the control panel. All right, so for our Unit 4, we are going to be focusing on using assessment to foster alignment. It's a topic I am very interested in, and I hope that you all enjoy it as well. So to begin, we're going to talk through our agenda very quickly. So first, we will ground ourselves in best practice, and we will use the developmentally appropriate position statement and a program self-assessment. So again, that's where you need that position statement located in the handout section. We will then talk through strategies for using assessment to increase alignment. Then we will tie everything together using that theory of change that we always come back to in our webinars. And then finally, as usual, we will talk through next steps. So as usual, we will take some time to ground ourselves in best practice surrounding assessment. So in order to ground ourselves in developmentally appropriate practice, we are going to engage in a short activity. So first, I would like for you to read developmentally appropriate practice guideline number 4, located in that position statement, again in the handout section. The section is approximately 1 page, and it can be found on pages 21 and 22. That's on your screen. I want you to keep the following questions in mind as you read guideline number 4. So the first question is, what is something you read that is implemented in your district? So that would be something currently being implemented. The next question is something you read that you want to strengthen in your district. So the position statement will sort of give you best practice surrounding assessment. After you read that section, please log into Slido using the event code on your screen. The event code can also be found at the top of the website, which I will pull up in just a moment. After you read, you will answer those 2 questions. This is going to take some time, so I'm actually going to mute myself and give you about 5 to 7 minutes to go ahead and read that and respond. So the poll is up on the left-hand side. You can see how to join, and we will actually just do 1 question at a time. So once you've read that 1 page of pages 21 and pages 22, please feel free to log in and go ahead and answer the question at the top of your screen. I've seen that a few people have joined us just in the last couple of minutes. We're currently reading the developmentally appropriate practice guideline number 4. It's located in the position statement. You can find that document under the handout section of the control panel on the right, and you can find this specific section on pages 21 and 22. It's just about one page, and we're just doing a quick response to that reading. So again, on the control panel at the right side of your screen, under handouts, you will find the document we're using. Thank you. Looks like we're starting to get some responses. Please feel free, once you've read that section, to go ahead and post yourself so we can look at a variety of answers. Thank you. Looks like someone new has joined our webinar. We are currently reading the DAP position statement. It's located in the handout section of your control panel on the right side of your screen. And we are reading Developmentally Appropriate Practice Guideline 4, which centers on assessment. It's located on pages 21 and 22. If you want to pull that up, we're going to use it for this question and another. And if everybody else wants to go ahead and start posting any responses, initial responses they may have, that would be great. We'll move on in just a second. All right, we have a couple of responses. If you're having any trouble accessing Slido, please make sure to message Tamala in the chat box. She would be so happy to help you. It looks like current things that are being implemented are decisions that have a major impact are not based off of one assessment. So if someone's using more than one assessment, we're going to talk about that later. That's always great. Sometimes the assessment data shows that the student may need some further evaluation. So really using that data to drive decision making. Someone is using information to speak with families at conference time. That's always wonderful. And then using assessment data to inform instruction. All of those are great. We're actually going to move on to the next question. So response time should be quicker here since we've already read the article. Oh, we just had a new one come in. Oh, everybody's coming in. Wonderful. It was perfect timing. So it looks like decisions that have a major impact on children, such as enrollment or placement, are never made on the basis of results from a single development assessment. So again, sort of that idea of using more than one assessment, which is always great. And they actually specifically point out observations in their answer, which we will discuss later today. And then this newest answer, providing parent training and guided reading levels, developmentally appropriate benchmark, and also behavior strategies, so that parent kind of guidance and training piece is wonderful. And then they're also training their staff. So the next question is, what is something you read that you want to strengthen in your district? So something you read that maybe you think, oop, we're not quite doing that yet, that I would like to, consider that. I'll give about 2 or 3 minutes for responses to come in. Thank you. All right, responses have started to come in. So when folks are looking at what they might want to strengthen, someone wrote making assessments more purposeful when it comes to daily instruction, helping teachers be better equipped at using the data appropriately. That's actually something we're going to touch on today. Ooh, and I love this response, children's own evaluation of their work. We take into account the family's input, but I've never given much thought to the child's evaluation at such a young age. So really giving a child some agency in their ability to evaluate their work. And then the methods of assessment are appropriate to the developmental status and experiences of young children. They recognize individual variation in learners and allow children to demonstrate their competence. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, how our little learners are not always the most reliable test takers and what that means for giving assessments. Thank you so much for your participation. I'm going to exit out of this so we can go back to our presentation. So I always think that that document is a great document to go back to if you just want to ground yourself in best practice. I've put it in the handouts. You obviously opened it. It can also be found on our group's website, and we use it in almost every webinar we have. So it's a great tool just to reference if you ever sort of want to go back to what best practice looks like. It's also important to ground ourselves in the self-assessment, and hopefully you're all becoming more familiar with it as we dive into a section each unit. So we're actually going to take a moment to look at the rubric now. As you can see, this is a formative assessment strand on the self-assessment, and we have both pre-kindergarten and kindergarten strands, and I've put them on top of each other so you can see the difference. So ultimately, there are some commonalities. We want multiple forms of assessment to be used to assess content areas, and formative assessment should be developmentally, linguistically, and culturally appropriate. And then, of course, you would sort of rate yourself on where you find yourself on that rubric, and you could be anywhere along the way. The next strand we're going to look at is the use of assessment instruments. So I'm going to let you take a moment to look at the rubric. I'll give you about 20 seconds to glance over that. So as you can see, ideally a district is providing support and ensuring an assessment from the commissioner's list is used at least 3 times a year. We know that way we can sort of measure student progress and ensure that we're keeping up with where students are. There are 3 additional strands that are the same in both pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, so they are not broken up. I'll allow you to look over these strands, but a few key points to note. First, a district ideally has written guidance and provides support to teachers regarding using assessment data. So they have a process to ensure instruction is driven by data, and they're helping teachers know how to do that. Also, a district requires and supports teachers to involve parents as partners in the assessment of their child's development, and ideally to be exemplary, that's occurring twice a year, so really investing parents in the process of assessing. Additionally, a district ideally has a process in place to ensure data from student assessment is used when making referrals for students. And I'm going to pause right now to give you time to look over this and also to send Tamala any questions you may have regarding the self-assessment, the strands that we've been over. If you have a question, just post it in the chat box in your control panel, and we'll move on in about 30 seconds if there are no questions. Thank you. All right, we have one question that came in, and Amanda wanted to know how other districts use parents to help in the assessment of their child. And I'm not currently in a district, but I can tell you what that could look like potentially. And I also think that would be a great thing to bring up in our PLC for folks to be able to discuss how they actually make a lot of these things happen. I think that could look like bringing parents in to talk about assessment data for observational assessments or assessments that require, watching a child do a task. I think it's important to ask for parental input, to ask parents if they've seen certain behaviors or certain skills played out. But I think ultimately just opening up that dialogue and making sure that you're including parents and what they see on a daily basis as part of that process. Again, I think that would be a great question to bring up in our PLC, and I hope that we're able to do that. We'll go ahead and move along. And again, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type those into the chat box and Tamala will get right back to you. So there are 3 ways that we will discuss using assessment to increase alignment. So we're going to move on to the actual strategies that will be the meat of our presentation today. First, we will talk about increasing teachers and administrators' assessment literacy. We will talk about supporting the use of multiple forms of assessment, something that's already been brought up today, and then supporting open and collaborative discussion of assessment data. Again, something we've already touched on today. So first, we will discuss increasing assessment literacy. Being assessment literate means that educators are experts in learners and learning, not in statistical measurements or analysis. So I really like this quote because it gets to the heart of, is it the numbers that we are really concerned about, or is it the learning the numbers represent? So are we focused on the changes that need to take place to actually help students? We can analyze assessments using data, and we can put students in small groups, but we need to focus on the learner and the actual learning that is happening. And I think sometimes when we start to focus on assessment data, we can forget that. So in order to build teachers and administrators' assessment literacy, a couple of things need to happen. First, teachers and administrators need an understanding of the types, purposes, and uses of assessment. In order to understand the best way to assess students, teachers and administrators must know what's available and what different assessments measure and how they work. There are a lot of assessments out there, and if you're unsure of exactly how they work or what they measure, you're not going to get very far. Additionally, teachers and administrators need a continuum of assessments to use to improve teaching and learning. Teachers should have access to multiple types of assessment to assess their students in the way they see fit. As we look at the different types of assessments, whether from the commissioner's list or from an observational checklist, teachers must understand the purpose. They must understand what information about the learner and learning we get from the assessment. It's also important to provide professional development to increase assessment literacy. There are a range of topics on your screen that PD could center around. So you could center a PD on appreciation for the role of assessment in teaching and learning. So teaching teachers why you need to assess, what's the value in it. The knowledge of assessing all developmental domains. Again, that's a requirement to be exemplary on the rubric. So what does that mean? I think that some teachers may not know what all 10 developmental domains are in pre-kindergarten, so making sure that your teachers understand that. Understanding of multiple types of assessment, we've touched on that a bit, that helping teachers see what different assessments can do and what it can help them learn about their students. The utilization of assessment results, and then best practices related to assessment. So just teaching teachers the importance of giving an assessment the way that it's intended to be given, how to ensure that assessments are reliable, and watching for any bias that may take place in those assessments. So as mentioned, it's important to have multiple types of assessments available to teachers. So before we jump in, I'm going to do one more quick Slido. It is the last one of the day, I promise. But I just want to gather some information on what forms of assessment you currently use in your district. So this could be a specific assessment that you use, or it could be a more general category. So we use observational assessments. You can include either of those. We just sort of want to get some information on what you're doing. So I'm going to close this out and open up that poll. Feel free to enter your response. All right, we have a few responses. It looks like some folks are listing the specific assessments they used. Some folks use checklist, observation. Some have teachers who are developing assessments. I see a lot of assessments that are on the commissioner's list of approved assessments, running records, anecdotal collection of task completion. There are so many different types, formal and informal, and everybody uses sort of a different combination depending on their needs. Thank you so much for responding. So I'm going to go ahead and read this quote for us really quickly. It says, when educators, policymakers, researchers, or parents call for the use of multiple measures of assessment, what they often are asking for is a holistic picture of what a student knows and can do based on a review of various sources of student performance of various kinds across various subjects conducted at different points in time. So I think this quote emphasizes the need to not just use one assessment to measure a child. We want a more holistic picture. We want to authentically understand their development and learning by providing them different opportunities to show what they know and what they can do. So there are several reasons we want to use more than one form of assessment. So first, we want more than a single test score. I think as adults working, we don't want to be evaluated on our job performance by just one moment in time. We don't want our boss to walk by and maybe the moment that we've chosen to eat a sandwich at our desk and have that be the moment they evaluate us on our job performance. And in the same way, we don't want to do that to students. We don't just want to take a snapshot of what they know in one moment and assume that's all that they can do. Additionally, multiple forms of assessment help to accurately gauge social and emotional development. And finally, young learners may be unreliable test takers. If you have ever been in a pre-kindergarten classroom or have taught in a pre-kindergarten classroom, you may just know this. It's sort of the nature of child development. A child may know something one day and the next day they may not know it. And so in order to accurately gauge learning, we have to assess more than once, and we may have to do it in different formats. So assessments can come in many forms, as we saw of your answers. There are a few on your screen that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And each of these assessment types allows us to learn about children's learning and development and how that translates into teaching. Some of these assessments are more formal and some are more authentic. We are actually going to focus on one form of assessment today primarily, and that is going to be teacher observations. We're mainly going to focus on this because it can be a challenge for teachers to implement, but it can provide some of the most authentic data. It can be a challenge for administrators to support teachers at, and it can be difficult, again, for teachers to implement. So we're going to watch a short video about how to actually implement observations.
Assessment. To appropriately support development and learning, early childhood teachers and providers need accurate, real-time information about each child's progress. But how do I make that happen in the midst of busy days filled with active children? You need a plan. And most importantly in that plan, you need to organize your assessments so they are woven seamlessly into your daily routines. To organize your assessment system, plan what and when to observe. Place recording materials in easy-to-access places throughout your learning space. Store information in an organized, systematic way. Review observations regularly. Plan. Plan what and when to observe. Organize your assessment plan around 3 windows of opportunity: spontaneous observations, targeted observations embedded in daily routines, and prompted observations of specific skills. Spontaneous observations occur as part of your interactions with children throughout the day. You see or hear something that tells you about what the child is learning or feeling. For example, you may spontaneously observe cooperative play with peers or problem-solving skills in the block area. Targeted observations involve purposeful planning of when and where to observe particular skills or behaviors. Identify times, places, and activities that provide opportunities to assess specific skills. Schedule targeted observations on your calendar. For example, To observe how children are handling separation, you can plan to observe them at the beginning of the day during drop-off time. Prompted observations happen when you plan activities that create the opportunity to observe specific skills. To discover what a child knows about sorting and classifying, for example, you can introduce a sorting activity during choice time. Sometimes you may need the help of your colleagues to observe all children in your group. Make a plan to rotate the observer role. Place record.
All right, we're going to go ahead and stop the video there. I think this video is focusing just on observations, but I think the key part of this is that you have to plan, right? Teachers have to be able to plan for how they will implement assessments. And so we're using the idea of observations. But regardless of what type of assessment you're using, teachers are going to need support. And so we're going to break down using observations, what kind of support teachers may need. There are some ideas on your screen. So you might need to help teachers in integrating observations throughout the day and embedding observations into daily routines. So helping them pinpoint ways that they can do what the video was talking about. And you may have to encourage teachers to plan targeted observations in their lesson plans. So if they need specific data, they may need assistance in figuring out how to include that, whether it's a quick moment at center time or figuring out other pockets where they could assess a student observationally. You may need to help them schedule time in PLCs for teachers to review observations. You may need to provide ongoing professional development to strengthen teacher observation skills, or you may need to provide technology tools that streamline observations and analysis. So if we're asking teachers to do assessments, we have to do the part of supporting them to make that as easy as we can. In addition to needing assistance with specific types of assessments, teachers will need support with using multiple forms of assessments. So it's important assessment tools are built into the larger plan for the year. So what exactly would that look like? I think it could include building a variety of assessment tools into curriculum maps or unit guides. So actually explicitly stating in those documents when teachers should assess, giving them checklists or tools or rubrics to help them assess. So actually building that into the tools that they will use in their classroom. I also think it's important to make connections between universal screeners or progress monitoring tools and classroom instructions in the curriculum maps and unit guides. I think sometimes teachers feel like, well, I have to do this test because I'm required to, but trying to make connections to let them know why that information is valuable and how they can actually use that in their classroom instruction. Finally, providing guidance on how to use data from multiple assessments to drive planning and instruction. So again, when I asked what sorts of assessments you're using, many of you put multiple forms of assessment, which again, we think is fantastic, right? But we want to make sure that teachers are making the connections for how to integrate those multiple forms of assessments into how they teach their students. And that's work that we need to do for them. So here's an example, well, if it will go. Here's an example of what a tool might look like that you could provide for a teacher. My coworker sort of mocked this up, and this would be a document that you could give them. This looks like it's a kindergarten classroom, looking at the first unit in math, numbers 0 through 10. So it's a learning progression. They have the skills at the top, so it uses number words, rote counts, one-to-one correspondence. The teacher could put the names of the students, and then teachers are able to just jot down the date that they saw that student master that objective. I think that this is great for two reasons. One, it allows teachers to see if there are big gaps in learning. So if every child is missing something, they obviously need to reteach. If one child is missing something, they know they need to assess that in some way. And it also serves as a great piece later down the road because you can really prove mastery if you've seen that students have done this more than one time. So Courtney used number words 4 times. I think we can say that she's probably mastered that. So this is just an example of a type of tool that you could develop to include in a unit map or progression for teachers just to help them with assessments. So our last topic surrounding using assessment to facilitate alignment involves supporting open and collaborative discussions. So there are actually several forms that these discussions could take. You might analyze assessment practices. So how are you actually assessing children in your classroom? You could analyze assessment data. So looking at a grade level or across grade levels to see what the data is telling you. You could utilize assessment data to drive planning and instruction. I think we often see that at the upper grades, but I think doing that in the lower grades is important as well. And then planning for student transition. So as students maybe get ready to move from pre-K to kinder or kinder to first or whatever grade level, really using data to figure out what teachers need to do at the beginning of the year to get kids in the best place possible. So there are also several settings in which conversations around assessment could take place. We discussed vertical team meetings in Unit 2 using the structure we provided then, which was like using walkthroughs to pinpoint areas to focus on. An administrator could then gather data regarding assessment during walkthroughs. So for example, that could look like noticing assessments are administered differently at different grade levels, or observational assessments are used in one grade level but not the other. And then this data could be used to drive a conversation during a vertical team meeting. It could even be that assessment scores show a large difference between grade levels on a similar skill. So using that vertical team meeting model and structure, but focusing on assessment. Additionally, PLCs can serve as a setting to discuss assessment and assessment data. Again, I think we often see that in testing grades, but there's no reason why we can't take our data in early childhood and use it to help drive instruction in a PLC. So here we have provided several ideas for structuring discussions. So you could work in cross grade level pairs. So if you have a lot of folks in a room, it might be easier to pair them up. So folks at different grade levels could just have one person to chat with. You could focus on one specific level of students. So low, medium, or high, instead of kind of running the gamut, you could choose to focus on different groups of students at different meetings to really make sure that you have depth to your conversations. You could focus on one specific skill that is shared across grade levels. So you might have that vertical team meeting and just focus on rhyming or vocabulary, for instance. And then you can also develop assessment manages processes, routines, or structures, again, to ensure that assessment information is reliable and valid. You want to make sure that teachers are assessing in the same way. So as usual, we want to tie the work we've done back to our theory of change. So administering developmentally appropriate assessment lies in the implementation bucket. But we've discussed supports administrators can provide to teachers. Ultimately, these decisions come from decisions made by administrators to reflect developmentally appropriate practice. So in order to support teachers in implementing assessments in the best way possible, they need to be knowledgeable in developmentally appropriate practice. So our action steps for the unit are here. There are a couple of questions on the screen. Sorry, I thought I mistyped something, but I did not. I apologize. So there are two questions on the screen. First, how will you implement multiple forms of assessing in your district? And the second is, how can you utilize the data to increase vertical alignment in your district? And these are questions that we'll sort of use in our PLC that is coming up in a couple of weeks. So I have a couple of things to go over before we end our time together. First, if you have not filled out our Unit 3 survey, I'm going to actually copy that link right now into the chat box, and I would ask that you go to that. You can even go to it while I am still talking to you, and I would ask that you fill that out. I know that it has been quite some time. Let's see if I can get in there. It's been quite some time since we did that unit. It was the unit where you worked on your own to look at the schedules between pre-K and kindergarten and to analyze how instructional time was spent. So if you would go into that link, there we go. I think I've posted it multiple times. I apologize. If you would go in and ensure that you fill that out, you may have already filled it out, but if you have not, if you would do that before you get off today, I would appreciate it. Other than that, we will have a PLC meeting on January 30th at 2 p.m. Our guiding question is, how can using multiple forms of assessment lead to stronger alignment between pre-kindergarten and kindergarten? But I've also had a lot of questions about logistics surrounding assessment. So how do you make sure that teachers have time to do it? How do you make it work? I've had questions about what assessments people are using. So I hope that in that time we can just really collaborate and share what we found to be best practice while keeping in mind how to do assessments in the best way. And again, we will have our one-on-one calls coming up. That is per your scheduled time that we already have on the calendar, and that will be guided by progress on the action steps that you've taken. I will be on for a few more minutes. I would ask that you please fill out that Unit 3 survey if you have not. If you have any questions, I will be around. Please feel free to type them into the chat box. Otherwise, I will see you on January 30th. Thank you so much for coming.